Hey everybody, I wanted to go ahead and get another video out there for us to play around with. This one is still part of my practicum, and I would appreciate it if before you go any further you do take some time to fill out my form prior to watching the video. You can either scan the QR code there or go to the link that I will put down below. So today's video is about salt dough. And a little history about it is that it seems to have its roots in Egypt and then became very popular in Eastern Europe, where they would use it for gifts and wedding and decoration. And eventually, with immigration, it came over to the United States, specifically Pennsylvania, where it still continues. Even currently, you could go to various places in Pennsylvania and find pieces that have been created out of this product. So the recipe that I decided to use is 2 cups flour, 1 cup table salt, and about 3/4 cup water. If you get a sticky dough, you need to add a little more flour. If you get a crumbly dough, you need to add a little more water. There are many different ratio recipes out there, maybe 1 cup of flour to 1 cup of table salt, but I found this one worked well. You'll see a frog-looking turtle creature that I made later on, and I actually made him out of a 1-to-1 dough. So it worked well. I'm not sure truly what the difference is from one recipe to another, if the flour makes it more durable or if the salt makes it fall apart easier. I'm not really sure. I unfortunately didn't have the time at this moment to test out all the different recipes. So what I'm doing here is I've gone ahead and put everything in a bowl together. I'm using actually one of my mom's old bowls that is Pyrex, I believe. It has some red and yellow chickens on the outside of it. It's just a fun sentimental thing to me. So once you have everything completely combined in the bowl, you'll go ahead and pull it out, and I went ahead and used some parchment paper underneath it, put some flour down just to ensure that I wasn't getting too sticky. If you're doing this on a counter, you probably would be just fine to do it straight onto the counter, but since I was doing it on our dining room table, I didn't want to get down into the cracks and cause other cleanup jobs for myself. So what I'm doing is I'm kneading it really well. I'm adding a little more flour as I can feel that it gets tacky in my hands, and I'm just kneading it until it's really smooth and I don't feel there's any lumps or bumps or problems going on in it. I would say altogether this maybe took, I don't know, 15 minutes. It really wasn't that long of a process. And you can leave the dough just as it is. It will dry about this color, darker maybe in the oven than it would if you let it air dry. If you want the dough to be colored, you can use acrylic paint. From my understanding, I did find a recipe where you could put white acrylic paint into it, and it created a much brighter white dough versus this kind of off-white color that we have now. I had some gel food coloring on hand from a previous baking project, and so I used this burgundy gel and a blue gel later on, and you'll see that they really worked well for coloring the dough. It gets on my hands a little bit, but it's not messy, truthfully, like some methods of coloring the dough could be. So I went ahead and put in a few, toothpick scoops of the color, and just continued to knead it until I felt like I had a good homogeneous color. So the color was consistent throughout the entire ball of dough. My stepdaughter was really excited to get her hands in on this, so you'll start to see her involved here. She has the blue and was very excited about making a really vibrant blue gift for her mom. So we do essentially the same thing that I did before. You'll see that I kind of had to walk her through a little bit on the steps of how to dye it, how to knead it, how to work with the dough so that it created and distributed the dye well enough so that it created that homogeneous color. My stepdaughter is 10, and I feel like she did really well with playing around with and understanding my directions. I would think that this would be a great project for kids in maybe 3rd grade and below, of course. And it's definitely still good for anyone above that. This is a really quick, easy, non-toxic, from my understanding, product that most of us have all the parts on hand for. And she loved working with it. You can see that this blue is really, really bright. Later on, as we bake it, any of the colors will dull. So the blue became quite a bit lighter and didn't hold that vibrancy that she wanted. So we used some paints later on to kind of bring that back. But she's adding more dye here because she wants it even bluer. It must be blue, really blue. I'm experimenting a little bit on the top of the screen with putting in some burgundy and some blue to see what I come up with. And I really loved this kind of marbled look where it kind of looked like granite to me, or rock. I tried adding in some glitter at one point, and that was not as successful. So I'm sure that something like that may work. In our situation, it just was not the most, well, I'll stick with successful experiment. So I used the burgundy and the teal to create a purple, and then I do go ahead and color that last piece. But if you ever wanted to just leave it plain, totally go for it. You'll get, like I said, kind of an off-white to beige kind of coloring when it's hardened. You also can go ahead and paint it with acrylics or with other paints or things that you may have on hand. So here we're going to go ahead and try to experiment a little bit with different stamps, different textures, just kind of building it by hand. I went ahead and I had some rubber stamps on hand, and we used those kind of unsuccessfully, I think, for our method, though I do know from watching other videos and reading all the blogs I could find about this, that rubber stamps really are a common way to go about it. So if you want to put some imprints on your pieces, give it a shot. If you have some on hand, try them out. I created a couple coasters. What I wanted them to look like is somewhat like rock or geode almost, where they would eventually have kind of a gold or a metallic edge to them. And you'll see later on that it didn't turn out as well as I would have wanted it to. And as thin as I had rolled those coasters, they actually became a bit fragile. So Avery's showing here where it's a really good material to just kind of play around with. You can create various things and then roll it back up, and it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. She's playing around making a pinch pot. We ultimately didn't go that route with what she was doing, but using this dough and creating things that get a little higher, you would need to use aluminum foil to stabilize it before you put it in the oven. Otherwise, it's going to fall. I use the aluminum foil later on for one of my own pieces that you'll see. And it worked really well, actually, to hold it upright. So we get the rolling pin out here because Avery wanted a very smooth surface to what she was creating. And she plays around with it quite a bit. We talk about using cookie cutters and maybe just cutting it directly with a safe knife, butter knife, with my supervision, of course. And what she opted to do was find a Tupperware reusable plastic container, and it was a great idea to create the shape she wanted. The trouble was that it then created a vacuum inside the container, so she couldn't get it out immediately. And we did what we could with it at the moment, but ultimately what we decided to do in this situation was I covered the underside of it so that it wouldn't dry out too fast, but we set it out to dry overnight, and the dough shrinks just enough that that next morning I was able to get it out of the container without much distortion to its shape. So here you can see I'm actually creating a little bit of a coil pot. I ultimately do put a piece inside it to create a ring holder, and thought that that would be a really awesome Mother's Day gift. I just wish I could have gotten this video out before then. Kind of in the top right-hand corner, you can see the little frog turtle thing that I was talking about I had created previously. And I baked it in the oven, and that's the color it came out. So it's a pretty light beige color. Ultimately, I paint it, so it was no issue at all what color it was to start with. He started out actually as a pinch pot as well, and when the edges started to fall, I just created some little balls of out of the salt dough and used those around it, and he kind of evolved into what he became. So you'll see him a little further on when I'm painting him, but I see he's hanging out here at the top of the screen. So here you can see we have a multitude of different colored products. I'm really bad at staying in the frame here, but Avery was fabulous about staying where she needed to be. So you can see I've got some acrylic paints up at the top left. We actually never opened the new box, but we do use some of my older acrylic paints that I had on hand. I have some washable acrylic paints down to the bottom right. I have some stamp pads. We've got some Sharpies off to the side. I have a white paint marker that we get out eventually. And the stuff I'm using there at the bottom was called Rub and Buff. And it was pretty old, but it was doing a decent job. It wasn't quite creating the look that I was hoping for, though. So we kind of used, or end up using, that coaster for some experiment later on. I'm drawing on it here with metallic Sharpies. Now I'm trying a stamp pad. These are kind of iridescent stamp pads, so they're not meant to be really bright. But give it a shot. Try different materials that you have on hand. From this point forward, all you're going to do is let them air dry, and then if you choose to seal the pieces, you can. I use a product that was a water-based sort of polyurethane, and I do show it a little later on that I picked it up from Home Depot, but it worked well to create a bit of a luster to them and seal them well so that hopefully they don't end up with any any damage from just use in general, other than my toddler dropping them, which she almost broke this one today, actually. So my stepdaughter has painted hers with the blue. She's gone off. She's letting it dry and watching TV for a minute here. And so I take my time and paint my trog? I'm not sure. Frog turtle looking creature. You can see I'm painting his little feet black, and I painted his eyes black. and just trying to give them a little bit of a different look than if I painted the whole thing green. I used the paint marker, which again was a Sharpie branded product, and drew the initials there that you can see at the top of the screen on the bottom of that coil pot that I built. I chose not to paint that coil pot at all because I wanted you to see what it could look like if you dye your dough and then just straight bake it. There was quite a bit of difference in the color of the dough once it was baked, but I think with the sealer that I used, it actually came out nicely. It doesn't brighten up the colors completely, but it does give them a bit of a sheen that I thought was perfectly acceptable. So Avery's decided to go ahead and draw a flower on her coaster. She's going to go ahead and use the paint pen, and she really liked the fact that you could just draw with it instead of having to use the brush, because she was a little concerned that with the brush she wasn't going to get as precise of a line as she wanted. So the paint pen that we just happened to have on hand worked out really well for her. I would really encourage you that if you've got, old house paint on hand, you can try that. Any sort of spray paint potentially, Sharpie markers, any acrylic paints. I'm not sure that I would use oil paints just because of the time they take to dry. And especially if this was something you're doing with small kids, I would avoid those if possible. So here in a minute, you're going to see that my camera decided it was full and would not hold any more video. So I lost some time of us decorating these pieces, but I do have the finished pieces and I will show you those shortly. Here we go. You can see the varathane that I used. Those are the original colors here of the dough. And you can see with this ring holder how they kind of dulled down. They definitely aren't as vibrant as they were. But I think with the coasters, had I added maybe some white acrylic to the beginning or to the original batch, maybe they would have stood out quite a bit. Here I'm showing you the difference between one that has been baked and not coated and the one that had been coated with the spray polyurethane. This is my stepdaughter's coaster that she went ahead and gave her mom, and here is my frog turtle creature. I used Sharpie markers actually to create the pattern on his shell. And I think that, it could be something pretty cool to just use for your trinkets or your rings or your jewelry, keys even maybe when you walk in the door. I created his shell by molding it over a small cup that I had, and it took forever to get it back off. So if you're going to do something like that, I would highly recommend you put saran wrap or wax paper between them. So I hope this was a good project for you. I hope you try it out. If you do, please, please, please make sure that you do this form at the end and let me know how it goes. So I hope you enjoyed and have a great day.